What happens when terrible design, disregard for safety and corruption come together? Well, obviously nothing good, especially when you put it out to sea. Do enter the vault and find out about the disaster of the MS Salam Boccaccio 98. The MS Salam Boccaccio 98 was a roll-on, roll-off ferry operated by the Egyptian company El Salam Maritime Transport. A roll-on, roll-off ferry is a type of ship where the main cargo is vehicles with wheels that can drive on and off the ship using ramps, often at the stern, which is the back of the ship, or the bow, which is the front of the ship. In some cases there are ramps on both sides, but the Salam Boccaccio 98 only had one at the stern. The ship started out its life in 1970 as a Boccaccio, owned by the Italian company Tirrenia di Navigazione, and sailed mostly between Italian ports. At that point she had quite a sleek and pleasant, although much smaller design than she did in her later incarnation. Also, just so you know, many people like to call ships by female pronouns, and I like doing that too, but not everyone might be familiar with that, so I'm telling you. Anyway, at that point she's a classy lady, but unfortunately would see some absolutely shocking cosmetic procedures. In 1991, 3 additional passenger decks were added right on top of the ship, and 2 sponsons were built at the sides. Sponsons are large bulges extending from the lower hull of the ship to aid in stability. The almost cruise ship-like look of the Boccaccio was pretty much destroyed, as it now looked as if they pasted another ship or a building onto her. She looked absolutely top-heavy, but apparently passed the SOLAS 74 standards. SOLAS is the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, and its first version was introduced following the sinking of the Titanic. So this sort of thing is obviously taken very serious. In 1999, Boccaccio and her sisters with the same design and added modifications were sold to the El Salam Maritime Transport Company and saw even more modifications, such as extensive firefighting systems. This is when she became the Salam Boccaccio 98. She was registered in Panama and now sails the Red Sea. So what happened? On February 2, 2006, the Salam Boccaccio 98 sailed from the port of Duba in Saudi Arabia with an estimated 1,312 passengers and 96 crew members, headed for Safaja, Egypt. I say estimated numbers because some sources name different numbers. At first the departure seemed to go according to standard procedure, but soon things changed for the worse. Some survivors reported that the ship began to list to the side slightly, and eventually a fire was reported in a storage area, although there are also conflicting reports on that. Some claim it was in the car deck, some that it was in the engine room. It's not really clear. The captain wanted to return back to port and contacted the ship's owner, who then told the captain not to return and to continue on to Safaja. Then smoke began to fill the car deck, but no general alarm was sounded, which meant that most passengers had no idea about what was going on, which meant no one was prepared for an emergency. Without actually knowing the source of the fire, they began to fight it with water. At the same time, the wind outside was starting to increase as well. The captain soon turned off the lights outside to not be visible to other ships. Most likely he didn't want to be seen as having an emergency, which would mean the ship would have to stop and would most likely suffer consequences from management, even though they literally did have an emergency. And they continued fighting the fire without ever being able to put it out, mainly because they were unable to find the actual source of it. They fought the fire for about 4.5 hours, and the crazy thing is, the water would normally be drained out of the ship, but the drains were blocked and the pumps also didn't work. So the water just kept on getting more and more inside the ship, which then caused a deadly chain reaction. The ship began to lean and soon reached 15 degrees to starboard, which is the right side. That's when panic broke out in the bridge of the ship. The captain ordered a sharp turn to port, which is the left side, in an attempt to correct the list, but it was too late. The ship leaned worse, and he tried to correct the list by turning again and again, but nothing worked, and still no signal to abandon ship was given. At the same time, passengers were left to themselves and began to scramble to get out of the ship. Some crew acted on their own and attempted to help passengers evacuate, but many other passengers and crew were still waiting for an order to actually evacuate the ship, as it began to capsize. No mayday was sent up until the very last minute. The crew began to throw safety equipment into the water in panic, and people jumped off trying to get to inflatable rafts that they still had to open up in the water. Then within 10 minutes, the ship fully capsized and disappeared beneath the sea. The rescue situation in itself was quite chaotic too, and frankly just made me shake my head. The ship's distress signal was sent in the moment it went beneath the waves, and yet it took almost 12 hours for rescue attempts to actually begin, so that the ships only arrived around 3 p.m. in the afternoon. The reason why? Initially, bad weather was stated as a reason, but it was later revealed that many officials failed to react fast enough because of an important soccer game that was being shown on TV. I mean, seriously, in that time countless of people probably drowned or died from hypothermia. There was also the MV St. Catherine, owned by the same company, which was sailing to Dubai at the time and was actually not too far from the wreck site, but refused to help, claiming that it would endanger the ship's passengers. In the end, multiple ships came to the rescue, but out of 1,418 passengers and crew, only 387 people could be saved. This disaster is filled with controversy. First of all, the actual origin of the fire and the cause of the sinking is still not fully clear. Most people assume that the main cause of the sinking is the free surface effect. You see, if water accumulates inside a ship in an open space like a car deck, and when the ship leans to one side, all that water will go to that side as well. That will cause the center of gravity to shift and ultimately causes the ship to capsize. That might have happened with all the water being used for firefighting. But some survivors stated they heard explosions just prior to the disaster, with one survivor even stating that one explosion was so strong that it even caused glass to shatter. There is also the issue that the ones responsible for making sure that the ship is in a good condition most likely didn't do their job. In this case, it was the Italian Classification Society, RINA. Supposedly, they inspected the ship on a regular basis and the ship passed all safety standards, but according to several accounts, that was not true, as many said that the ship was in an absolutely terrible condition. RINA also had failed proper inspection before, when in 1999 the tanker Erika broke apart and sank, causing a giant oil spill due to failed inspections. Other accounts also state that the captain was the first person to leave the sinking ship, but he actually ended up being one of the missing, so it's not clear if this is true or not. What is clear though is that the voice recording from the bridge showed that the crew was utterly clueless and unprepared for emergencies. Then in July 2008, the owner of the ship, Mamdouh Ismail, along with 3 others, were acquitted of any wrongdoings by an Egyptian court, which unsurprisingly caused a massive outcry. As Mamdouh was a part of the Egyptian parliament, it was clear to be a case of corruption. Luckily, the outcry made a change, and in 2009 the acquittal was overturned, putting Mamdouh in jail for 7 years. Although the families of the victims were paid $26,000 for compensation, I don't think any amount of jail time or money can undo the pain they feel. So, what did we learn from this? Honestly, nothing new, as all the regulations that were in place to prevent this disaster already existed. And the company had enough time to learn, as this wasn't their first disaster under their hands. Also, the fact that unsafe old ships from Western countries are sold to poorer countries with less regulations is still a problem. But one thing that was done right was that all the sister ships of the Salam Boccaccio 98 was scrapped almost instantly following the disaster. However, justice has not been served yet, as there are still people who were also responsible and saw no consequences. I hope that this video can bring some attention to the situation, as this is very recent history and the survivors still have to deal with the trauma of it, and the families of the victims still mourn their lost loved ones today. Thank you for tuning in to WTH What's a History on Ace Vault. I'm A, and I talk about all things history, especially when it's more obscure, odd, especially fascinating, or just truly bonkers. If you like this video, leave a like and subscribe for more content is planned. Have a nice week, and I'll see you next time!